Ah, the check engine light. That little symbol that just pops up and instantly ruins your day. You start thinking about unexpected repair bills. But what if you could actually understand what it's trying to tell you? Well, that's what we're going to do today. We're going to decode one of the most common reasons that light comes on, the P0420 code.
Right. So when that little amber light starts glowing on your dash, it's not just there to give you a heart attack. It's a message. Your car's computer has been running tests in the background, and it's trying to point you to a specific problem. So think of it less like a sign of doom and more like the first clue in a mystery.
And we're going to solve this mystery by following a pretty logical path. First, we'll figure out what a P0420 code even is. Then we'll look at how the system actually works. We'll start with the easiest possible check you can do, then figure out if it's the sensors or the converter. I'll even show you how to test them, and we'll touch on a potential quick fix. Let's get into it.
Okay, so first things first, what is your car actually trying to say when it throws a P0420 code at you? Let's translate this mechanic speak into plain English.
The official fancy definition is catalyst system efficiency below threshold, bank 1. Whoa, okay. Don't let the jargon scare you. Bank 1 just tells you which side of the engine the problem is on. And for most four-cylinder cars, you only have one bank anyway, so don't worry about it. The really important part is this. Your car's computer is watching your catalytic converter, and it's decided its performance just isn't cutting it anymore.
And your car's computer is a tough grader. See, to meet emission standards, it demands that your catalytic converter is working at 95% efficiency or better. It needs to be cleaning almost all the nasty stuff out of your exhaust. The second its performance dips below that 95% line, boom, the check engine light comes on and that P0420 code gets logged. It's not a vague guess, it's a very specific failing grade.
So why would it fail? Well, it usually boils down to one of a few things. You could have an exhaust leak that's throwing everything off. You might have a bad oxygen sensor that's feeding the computer bad info, or the catalytic converter itself might actually be toast. Now, it could be a bigger engine problem, but you'd almost always have other codes along with the P0420 if that were the case.
Now, to diagnose this thing properly, you really need to understand how all the parts work together. So let's meet the key players on the team, the ones responsible for your exhaust system.
Just picture the exhaust flowing out of your engine. The first thing it does is pass by what's called an upstream oxygen sensor. Next, it flows into the catalytic converter, which does all the hard work of cleaning the gas. And finally, as it leaves, it passes a downstream oxygen sensor. The car's computer is constantly comparing the signals from those two sensors to see if the converter is actually doing its job.
These O2 sensors, they're like the spies of the system. They're constantly measuring how much oxygen is left in the exhaust gas. They even have little heaters inside them so the computer can see how fast the catalytic converter is warming up, which is another big clue to its overall health. Okay, so we know the parts, we know the goal. Where do we even begin our investigation? Well, let me tell you, the golden rule of car repair is to always start with the simplest, cheapest, and easiest things first.
And this quote right here is just perfect. Before you even think about buying an expensive sensor or a new catalytic converter, you need to get under your car and just look. Look at your exhaust system. Why? Because a tiny leak can let extra air into the pipes, and that extra air can completely fool the oxygen sensors into thinking the converter has failed when it's perfectly fine.
So once you're safely under the car, you're looking for the obvious stuff, any holes or cracks in the pipes. But you also want to pay really close attention to the flanges, the spots where two pipes are bolted together. The little gaskets between them can fail and blow out, creating a leak that messes up the sensor readings. It's a super common problem and way cheaper to fix than a whole converter.
All right, let's say you've checked for leaks and your exhaust system is solid. That means we've just narrowed our investigation down to the two main suspects, the sensors and the converter itself.
So here's the big question. Who's to blame? Is it the O2 sensor, the system's reporter, that's sending bad information to the computer? Or is it the catalytic converter, the system's worker, that's actually clogged up or broken inside and can't do its job? One is lying and the other might be dying. We got to figure out which one it is. Thankfully, there's a really simple and surprisingly effective test that you can do to get a definitive answer. And you absolutely do not need to be a master mechanic to pull this off. It's called the temperature gun test. You can get one of these little infrared temperature guns pretty cheap, and they're super easy to use. All you do is get the engine nice and warm, then you just point and shoot to get a temperature reading of the exhaust pipe right before the converter, and then do the same thing for the pipe right after it.
The difference between those two numbers is going to tell you pretty much everything.
So here's how to read the results. A healthy catalytic converter creates a chemical reaction, and that reaction generates a lot of heat. So the pipe after the converter should be a lot hotter. We're talking 50 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit hotter than the pipe before it. But if the temperature is hotter before the converter, or even if it's just about the same, well, that is a massive red flag. It almost always means the converter is clogged up and isn't letting the exhaust flow through.
And, this test result usually lines up with a symptom you can actually feel from the driver's seat. A clogged converter is basically like trying to exhale through a tiny coffee stirrer. The engine struggles to push the exhaust out, and that usually leads to a really noticeable loss of power and sluggish acceleration. If your car feels weak and it fails the temperature test, you've pretty much found your culprit.
Now, if your test points to a clogged converter, your heart might sink a little, thinking about that expensive repair bill. But hold on. Before you go there, there's one last potential quick fix people talk about: catalytic converter cleaners.
I mean, it's a tempting thought, right? Just pour a bottle of this stuff in your gas tank and poof, the problem disappears. But does it actually work? Well, the answer is a big it depends. So here's the deal. These cleaners are made to handle minor carbon buildup and some light gunk. They tend to work best on cars that do a lot of short, stop-and-go city driving, where the exhaust never really gets hot enough to burn itself clean. But let's be crystal clear. No magic potion in a bottle is going to fix a converter that's physically broken inside or one that's totally plugged solid. And it's definitely not going to fix an exhaust leak or a bad sensor.
And this quote really says it all perfectly. The results can and do vary. If you have a minor efficiency problem because of some buildup, yeah, it might be just enough to clear the code and turn that light off. For anything more serious, it probably won't do a thing. So you can think of it as an option, but it is absolutely not a guarantee. So there you have it. We went from a mysterious, scary warning light to a clear, logical diagnostic path. You now know what the P0420 code is really saying, how the system is supposed to work, and how to test the most important parts. You know the why behind the problem. So the only question left is, what's your next move?